This is Chris for the HandyGuard channel. Are you scared enough yet? Because apparently the United States government, or at least President Obama, does not think so. And I'm going to read to you from this MSN post of today, in which he declares Venezuela a threat to U.S. national security. Obama declares Venezuela a threat to U.S. national security. And before I can even get by the headline, I'm wondering, when is the army of Venezuela going to invade the United States and therefore be a threat to our national security? Hello? How many lies does it take to wake people up? So maybe this should be entitled, How Many Lies Can You Swallow Before You Really Get Sick to Your Stomach? Washington. The United States on Monday declared Venezuela a national security threat and ordered sanctions against 7 officials in the worst diplomatic dispute with the oil-rich country since Socialist President Nicolas Maduro took office in 2013. Hello, paragraph 1. This probably sums up the real reason why they are now a national security threat. Because they're an oil-rich country, and they're not going to play ball with somebody's oil company in the United States. Paragraph 2. President Barack Obama issued and signed the executive order, which senior administration officials said did not target the energy sector or Venezuela's broader economy. Just as U.S. relations with Cuba, another longtime U.S. foe in Latin America, are set to be normalized. Declaring a country a national security threat is the first step in starting a sanctions regime. The same process has been followed with countries such as Iran and Syria, U.S. officials said. This is a repeating process. When they don't play ball, or they want to come up with a monetary regime of their own that gives them freedom from the U.S.-dominated dollar system, they are first sanctioned to attack them financially and hurt them financially by taking them out of the dollar payment system or imposing sanctions that, without invading the country, do great harm to the people. The White House said the executive order targeted people whose actions undermined democratic processes or institutions, had committed acts of violence or abuse of human rights, were involved in prohibiting or penalizing freedom of expression, or were government officials involved in public corruption. Venezuelan officials, past and present, who violate the human rights of Venezuelan citizens and engage in acts of public corruption will not be welcome here. I'm quoting from the Washington issued statement. And we now have the tools to block their assets and their use of U.S. financial systems, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said in a statement. So, as I just mentioned, they're going to try and cut them off from the United States dominated system of currency exchange and systems for settling trade differentials between countries called the SWIFT system. Something to take away from those 2 paragraphs that we cannot continue to ignore, because if we do so, it's at our own great peril, is that the hypocrisy of our government is so blatant that to miss it, you have to not be paying attention at all. They are criticizing the Venezuelan officials for human rights violations and calling this to attention as one of the pretexts for declaring them a national security threat and sanctioning them to hurt their economy. But on the same hand, on the other side of the coin, our hypocritical government doesn't care one bit about the human rights violations that go on daily in regimes that play ball with Wall Street, that are favorable to the system as dominated by the United States. And a prime candidate and case in point is Saudi Arabia. They're vicious to their own people, horribly oppressive. I may be mistaken, but I don't believe women can even legally drive a car. They like to cut people's heads off too, by the way, and execute more by beheading than any terrorist group has to date. For things like blasphemy or adultery, you can get your head cut off in Saudi Arabia. It's been run by a corrupt regime for decades and generationally renewing. Do we care? Are we sanctioning Saudi Arabia? Are we invading Saudi Arabia or declaring them a national threat to our security? Of course not. There is an agreement between Saudi Arabia that involves oil and money, and it's blood money. So call your government a hypocrite when they are, or turn a blind eye at your own peril. So the article goes on to state that the government is deeply concerned by the Venezuelan government's efforts to escalate intimidation of its political opponents. Venezuela's problems cannot be solved by criminalizing dissent, he added. More hypocrisy. This administration of Obama has seen more dissenters imprisoned, persecuted, driven out of this country. Every whistleblower that Obama promised when he campaigned against George Bush and criticizing his persecution of dissenters, Obama vowed that he would be different. He would protect the whistleblowers, that they're important. And we have a right to dissent. It's part of our political and our American process. The exact opposite is what has happened. Obama has persecuted record numbers of dissenters by actually imprisoning them, running them out of the country at literal threat of imprisonment, and the cases in point go on and on. So research them, do your own homework, but don't believe the lie as it dribbles off their lip. Now, the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez told reporters that Caracas would respond to the U.S. move soon. The 7 individuals named in the order, which included top domestic security and intelligence officials, would have their property and interests in the United States blocked or frozen and would be denied entry into the United States. U.S. persons would also be prohibited from doing business with them. This is just the run-up. This is pretty inconsequential. They're going to seize the assets of a few key players to try and put pressure on the Venezuelan government to knuckle under, to cave in, or more stringent measures, more forceful measures will be brought into play to cripple them some more. And just remember that the real key factor underlying all of this, and we're going to get to this a little later in the article in detail, is that Venezuela is a massive oil producer and one of the biggest suppliers of crude oil to the United States. This is the underlying reason why any declaration of a threat would truly be underpinned. There's something going on in the oil trade between Venezuela and America that the oil companies or Wall Street are not reaping their usual massive profits from, so they usually go to the government to be their enforcer and their thug to extract and preserve the profits of Wall Street and the big corporations. Now, the government, our government, says that these efforts of the Venezuelans reflect a lack of seriousness on their part to deal with the grave situation it faces. So our government doesn't think that that's an adequate response of capitulation and towing the line. The U.S. officials told reporters in a conference call that the executive order did not target the Venezuelan people or economy. Bullshit. Any kind of sanction leveled at a country is absolutely going to affect their economy and their people. I call that one a blatant lie, straight up. And our government is stressing that the upcoming legislative elections that should be held without intimidation of the government's opponents. What business is that of ours, number one? Because we don't give a rat's ass about how a government intimidates their opponents as long as they play ball. Go back to the Saudi Arabian, Kuwaiti, Qatari, you name it, Pakistani, any government that could be the most heinous violator of human rights you can imagine will not be criticized by the United States as long as they're allowing us to rake in the money. Follow the money. The sanctions effectively, and I'm quoting again from the article, the sanctions effectively confirm Venezuela as the United States' primary adversary in Latin America. Really? We have to make the biggest oil producer in our hemisphere that we're dependent on for a vital national strategic resource? The biggest threat that we face in Latin America? That's not their doing, that's our doing. So saith nobody. Because this is nobody's rant. And they like to compare it with Cuba and Havana, which we have vilified for decades and decades for no reason other than they pissed off the wrong people in the United States. Powerful, rich people who own the government. Now, the commercial ties between Venezuela and the United States have, however, been largely unaffected by diplomatic flare-ups, which are common during the 14-year rule of the late socialist leader Hugo Chavez. You may have heard his name. Yep, socialist, vilified for all of his politics, without consideration for whether or not he took action based on the welfare of his own people. The United States in Venezuela is Venezuela's top trading partner, and Venezuela in 2014 remained the fourth largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. I'll repeat that Venezuela last year was the fourth largest supplier of crude oil to this country. That's huge. That's very important. And that is why they are bringing pressure on Venezuela now. They're very important to the strategic well-being of the largest oil consumer on the planet. Guess who that is? The U.S. military. And they don't like their oil supplies being crimped. Quoting again from the article, opposition leader and twice presidential candidate Enrique Capriles told Reuters, the news service, that the sanctions were a problem for a corrupt elite in the Maduro government, which is currently in power, but not ordinary Venezuelans. This is an opposition leader who would like to be elected, so he's going to suck up to anything the Americans do if it will help him get elected. But make no mistake, he will be every bit as corrupt as his predecessor. As long as he plays ball with the corrupt elite in the United States, however, they will have no problems with whatever he does to his own people, and Venezuela will no longer be declared a threat to national security, in the opinion of this observer. And the article concludes with, "It's not a problem with Venezuela or with the Venezuelans. It's a problem for the corrupt ones. It doesn't affect we Venezuelans." And that's the statement of the opposition leader who'd like to be elected. So go to the MSN article if you'd like for yourself. It is posted on their website, and the title of the topic is "Obama Declares Venezuela a Threat to U.S. National Security." The real takeaway that I get from this is, along with all the facts that we just read and I gave my take on, the overall big picture should perhaps be that we need to be afraid, we need to be kept in fear, and national threats will continue to be proclaimed by this regime as they were by the previous, and will no doubt be by whoever replaces the Obama regime. They're going to continue to declare as many threats as they can to keep you in as much fear as possible, to surrender as many liberties as you have yet remaining to give up, so their power can continue to be entrenched, deepened, and the monstrosity of Wall Street and Washington merged at the hip can continue to trample your liberty and rights while they rape, pillage, and plunder your wealth and well-being. Good luck. See you on the next rant. This is Nobody ranting on today's topic, rant number 1.